is Pashas for Eiro, and the sugya we will be discussing is a sugya we usually discuss approaching Pesach. But on Chodesh Nisan we usually speak about Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the sugya today is not Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, but rather Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. And let me just clearly explain there are two different mitzvahs. Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is at the Seder night, once a year. Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, every day, twice a day, morning and evening. Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim is a Mishnah in Brochas Daf Yud Beis. And that is a Mishnah we all remember, even those that never learned the Brochas, because we remember it from the Haggadah. Omer Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Areini ki ben 70 shana v'lo zechis et yom zechiras yetzias Mitzrayim b'laylos, ad shedor sheben zayim hashanem alaman tizkar es yom tzeischo mi'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecho. Yemei chayecho ol hayomim, kol yemei chayecho elo haleilos. So it seems to be clear that this mitzvah is learned from a posuk in Parshas Re'ei. And the posuk in Parshas Re'ei says, Lo yisaychel olav chametz sheves yomim toichel olav matzah yislecha moini ki bechepozin yetzosa mi'eretz Mitzrayim laman tizker es yom tzeischo mi'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecho. And that is the posuk that Ben Zoim had darshened. So what does it have to do with this week's parsha? It actually doesn't. In next week's parsha, in Parshas Boy, we learn another posuk. And the posuk says in Parshas Boy, V'yoyim Moshe Elohim zocher es hayoyim hazeh asher yetzosem me'Mitzrayim beis avodan ki v'choiz gad hoitzi Hashem eschem mizeh v'lo yochel chometz. So, why this week? Because in Parshas Va'eru we start learning about the Eser Makos, the 10 plagues that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought on Eretz Mitzrayim. And part of the Shiur today is exactly what are we supposed to remember? Is it the actual leaving Eretz Mitzrayim, or the process, or the miracles? What is Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim? But Rashi in Parshas Boy on the posuk Zocher es hayoyim hazeh asher yetzosem mi'Mitzrayim, and I'm quoting Rashi, Limeid shemaskiren yetzias Mitzrayim b'chol yoyim. So Rashi l'chayre goes against the Mishnah. The Mishnah learns Zechiras yetzias Mitzrayim b'chol yoyim boiker ve'erev from the posuk in Parshas Re'ei. But Rashi in Parshas Boy Zocher es hayoyim hazeh asher yetzosem mi'Mitzrayim Limeid shemaskiren yetzias Mitzrayim b'chol yoyim. The Rambam, both in Sefer Mitzvahs, Mitzvahs say Kuf Nun Zayin, and in Perek Zayin Alocha Alav Melchas Chumetz HaMatzah, the Rambam quotes this posuk Zocher es hayoyim hazeh as the source, the primary source, the main source for Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim and the Seder night. So l'chayre there's a machlokes Rashi and Rambam. How do we understand the posuk in Parshas Bo Zocher es hayoyim hazeh sheyetzosem mi'Mitzrayim? The Rambam is based on the Mishnah Brochas Yud Beis. Laman Tiskoyer is Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. What is Zocher? Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Rashi L'shitosri. Ki in Parshas Re'ei and the posuk Laman Tiskoyer Yom Tzeischo Mitzrayim, Rashi explains Al Yedei Achilas HaPesach v'Hamatzah. And that is L'choyer Pashtei Dekra. Lo yisaychel olav chometz sheves yomim toichel olav matzah Laman Tiskoyer Yom Tzeischo. So Rashi's pshat in Parshas Re'ei is Laman Tiskar al yedei achilas Pesach v'matzah. So it's not a mitzvah b'fnei atzmoi. It is al yedei achilas Pesach v'matzah. So Rashi l'shitosoi, but the Rambam seems to be based on the Mishnah. How would Rashi explain the Mishnah? So my general feeling is, before we go into a more in-depth study of this fascinating sugya, Laman Tiskar es yom tzeischo mi'eretz Mitzrayim is not a tzivui, it's not a command. It's just an explanation, it's the background. Laman Tiskar es yom tzeischo mi'Mitzrayim, that cannot be a mitzvah. The source of the mitzvah is Zocher es hayoyim hazeh asher yetzosem mi'Mitzrayim. From Laman Tiskar we only learn that it is Rotzen Hashem. It's important to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim by day and by night. ימי חייך אל היומם, כל ימי חייך אל הלילות. So, בזה ולימד על זה. What we learn from Laman Tiska is just a principle, days and nights. But the source of the mitzvah as a chiyuv, as a mitzvah, is Zocher es hayom hazeh asher yetzoso miMitzrayim. But this brings us to a very fundamental question. None of the Moinei HaMitzvahs, the great Rishonim that wrote Sifra HaMitzvahs, counts the mitzvah of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim in the list of Taryag mitzvahs. Neither the Rambam, nor the Ramban, nor the Smag, nor the Yereim. The only one that does is the Smak. Sefer Mitzvahs Kotan, Harim Korbel, Mitzvah Kuf Yud, and the latest and youngest of Moinei HaMitzvahs, the Tashbetz and Sefer Zohar HaRakiah. And he wonders why all the great Rishonim omitted this mitzvah from their list. So there are 5 different approaches and interpretations to understand why doesn't the Rambam or the Ramban or all the others count Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim as a mitzvah to say. Number 1, Yesh Oimrim, that it's only a mitzvah derabanan. It's an asmachta b'alma. That is based on the fact that Laman Tiska Yom Tzeiz Chom Yeretz Mitzrayim is not a mitzvah, it's not a command. It's just like Rashi explains, Al Yedei Achilas Pesach v'Matzah, Kodesh Baruch Hu wants us to remember. So it is the Rabbana that implemented Rotzon HaTorah and turned it into a mitzvah, but it's only a mitzvah derabanan. The Pri Chodesh in Ilchos Kriyas Shema, Siman Nun Ches is the first Siman in Ilchos Kriyas Shema, Siv Koden Aleph, has an argument with the Kesef Mishnah. The Kesef Mishnah, Perek Aleph, I think it's Halacha Yud Gimel, Perek Aleph, Ilchos Kriyas Shema, the Kesef Mishnah maintains that Zman Kriyas Shema Shachas, Gimel choice is only a din derabanan, Min HaTorah Kol HaYom Kuloi. The Pri Chodesh says no, it is Min HaTorah Gimel choice, because otherwise Kriyas Shema would not be defined as a mitzvah sasei shazman groma. It's noya kol hayom v'kol halayla. And mitzvah sasei shazman groma is only a mitzvah that is part of the day, isn't relevant, isn't a chiyuv. So if Zman Kriyas Shema would only be a derabanan, it means that Kriyas Shema is all day and all night. Why is it a mitzvah sasei shazman groma? How would the Kesef Mishnah deal with this argument? Very simple. It is one mitzvah, Kriyas Shema Shachas V'Avis, but 2 separate parts of the mitzvah. And Kriyas Shema Shel Yom is only b'Yom, Kriyas Shema Shel Laila is only b'Laila, and that is why it's Zman Groma. But the Pri Chodesh has a different feeling, and he says, if the mitzvah is noya kol hayom v'kol halayla, it would not be Zman Groma. And that proves that Zman Krishma is the Oraisa. Then the Pri Chodesh asks the question, so why Noshim Potter from Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim? This mitzvah is noya kol hayom v'kol halayla. And then he says, Yesh loima, that it's only a remez ba'alma. What does he mean? Does it mean that the entire mitzvah is a remez ba'alma? No, definitely not. He means that Droshes Chazal, kol yemei chayecho elu aleilos, that is a remez. And I think what the Pri Chodesh means to argue is, Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim and Torah is only b'Yom, b'Laila is only derabanan, and that is why it is a mitzvah sasei shazman groma. So it's difficult to argue that the entire mitzvah is derabanan, especially in Shittas HaRambam. I just need to turn around and take a Rambam out of the shelf. So I need to read to you the first 3 halachas in Hilchos Kriyas Shema. Hilchos Kriyas Shema, very first halachas in Sefer Ahava. Halacha Aleph. Pamayim b'kol yom koren Kriyas Shema b'yerev u'b'boiker. Shenemar b'shach v'chov kamecha. This is definitely a mitzvah d'oraisa. Halacha Beis. Umahu koira. Shloisha parshiyos elu. Shema v'hoyim shemaya v'yoyim d'oraisa. And then Halacha Gimel the Rambam writes, V'yafar b'shem mitzvah tzitzis neges b'layla. So why do we read Parsha Gimel b'layla? It's about tzitzis. Tzitzis einu neges b'layla. Koyden oisa b'layla m'nei sheyesh b'zichor Yetzias Mitzrayim. V'mitzvah lahas Yetzias Mitzrayim b'yoyim v'b'layla shalem alamantes g'yom Yetzias Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha. So isn't it clear that the Rambam maintains Schiras Yetzias is Min HaTorah? But the Rambam's punchline comes now. V'kriyas sholosh parshiyos elu al seder zeh Hi hanekreis kriyas shema. So it's clear beyond doubt, according to the Rambam. It's part of kriyas shema, and it's a mitzvah diuraisa. Hadar kushel dichta. So why doesn't he bring it in minyan hatariag? It's also l'choyer aloch mefresh and a gemor freshtus and brochas chofar af amid alaf sofek ome emes v'yatzav sofek loy ome emes v'yatzav. If he has a sofek regarding parsha gemasha kriyas shema and berchas kriyas shema, choyze v'koyre, because it's a sveike diuraisa. So explanation number 1 falls. Number 2, prima godem psiche korlelas psiche lehilchas kriyas shema has an interesting ha'ora, and he says, maybe when a Torah person is yotze this mitzvah b'machshava, and it's only the Rabbanan that he needs to be koirei, that he needs to verbalize, that he needs to lahoitzi b'svosov. And maybe because we yotze b'machshava, it's not on the list. But then the Prima Godem Chozaboy, and he retracts, because he quotes various different mitzvahs that are also b'machshava, and they are in the minyan of Tariag, so that wouldn't be a reason that this mitzvah should not be included in the list of Tariag. Explanation number 3, and this is very appealing, and that's the tzlach. And the tzlach says, the mitzvah of Schiris Yetzias Mitzrayim, the source is Lamantis ki yom tzeischo miyetz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecho. And the tzlach is based on the Rambam, not Rashi ala Torah. To the best of my memory, he doesn't even quote Rashi ala Torah, but I'm not sure. I didn't look it up now. The tzlach says that the mitzvah of Schiris Yetzias Mitzrayim is not a mitzvah gemura, because it's not a command, it's not a loshen tzivui. It's just what I define Ratzoyin HaTorah. So in the new edition of Minchas Osher ala Torah, I'm not sure, I think it's in Nun Beis, in Chumash Devorim, but all my Talmidim know, this is one of the most fundamental principles I mention a lot in my Shiurim. Ratzoyin HaTorah. Ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu kefi shu mitbateh b'Torah. So above and beyond the Tariag mitzvahs, there are many additional mitzvahs. They're not included in the list of Tariag, because Tariag is a tzivui, a command. So the tzlach says, Schiris Yetzias Mitzrayim is min HaTorah. But because it's not a mitzvah gemura, unlike Zocher es hayoyim hazeh, which is a command, Laman tizkor, like Rashi explains, Alidei Pesach, Alidei Matzah, and therefore, it's not on the list of Tariag. And this tzlach has a lot of appeal to me, because it is included in my huge siman, in which I quoted so many different sources of Ratzoyin HaTorah. Approach number 4, which has also tremendous appeal to me, and I think it's Torah Semis. It is brought in the name of Reb Chaim Brisker, even though I don't think it's an Reb Chaim al Rambam. But Reb Chaim's contemporary, who was the greatest Godel in Galicia at that time, Chuvas Beis Yitzchak, or Chaim Siman Yud Beis, says the same. Schiris Yetzias Mitzrayim is min HaTorah, but it's not a mitzvah b'fnei atzmo. It is part of mitzvahs kriyas shema. And therefore, it's not on the list. It's part of kriyas shema. And I think this approach is firmly based in the Rambam that I just quoted. Kriyas sholosh parshiyos elu, hi hanikreis kriyas shema. And the Rambam clearly says, why do we read Parshas V'yomer, Parsha Gimel Shel Kriyas Shema? Mipnei sheyesh ba zichron Yetzias Mitzrayim, and that is why we read it 2 times a day, by night as well. So it is included in Mitzvahs Kriyas Shema. Towards the end of today's Shiur, I will also explain and validate this approach, because Schiris Yetzias Mitzrayim is supposed to bring us to Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shemaim, and that is the essence of mitzvahs Kriyas Shema. Approach number 5, which is not as convincing. V'afar piken yesh loy mokoim. And maybe the mitzvah of Schiris Yetzias Mitzrayim is an extension, and it is part of the mitzvah of Sipui Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Eka mitzvah, Zocher es hayoyim hazeh, the Rambam is right. Zocher es hayoyim hazeh refers to Sipui Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Leila Seder. But as I explained many times, Be'ikar B'Toras HaRambam, Sometimes there is ikar mitzvah and additional principles that are included in the mitzvah. And maybe the same as in our sugya. Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim b'kol yom is a chelek of the mitzvah of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that fits in well with Rashi. Leman Tizkoyer is the hashlama of Zocher. And Zocher and Leman Tizkoyer are not two separate mitzvahs, but two sides of the same coin. And according to this approach, maybe there's not even a machlokes between Rambam and Rashi. Zocher is Yetzias Mitzrayim, but it is also Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, Bozeh v'limel al zeh. There's a machlokes in Poskim, Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, morning and night, boiker ve'erev, ad shedor sheben zoymer, amantis kes yom tzes chamesan kol yom echayecho. Yom echayecho el hayomim, kol yom echayecho elo el elois. Is that only Gimel Shois, like Kriya Shema, or is it all day? The Mishnah Megillah Daf Chof and the Sugya there, Kol ha-mitzvah shezmana b'yoyim mitzvos and kol ha-yoyim, zmana b'layla mitzvos kol ha-layla. Only Kriya Shema is an exception, because by Kriya Shema the pasuk says uvkomecha, and that is zman kima. So what is the din of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim b'yom? Kol ha-yoyim or Gimel Shois? Shagas Arya, Siman Yud says Kol ha-yoyim, because it's not the Shachmacha of Komecha. The Pri Chodesh I quoted in the beginning of the Shiur also clearly says Kol ha-yoyim, and that is why he has a problem. Why is it the mitzvah say Shazman Groma? The Or Sameach, based on the Rambam we just quoted, says no. Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim is a part of Kriya Shema, so it goes without saying. Same halacha says Kriya Shema. Gimel Kriyas Sholosh Parshas Eila Alasei Dehiani Kreis Kriya Shema. So this question is mitlatali. It's totally dependent on the different approaches. How do we define the mitzvah of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim? Reb Meir Simcha is right if it's part of Kriya Shema, and that is obviously what we learn from the Rambam. But if it's a mitzvah b'fnei yatzma like the Tzlach or the others, then why would it be Gimel Shois? It would be like all the other mitzvahs, shezmana b'yom shemitzvosan kol hayom. So this once again depends on the essence of the mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim all year round, every morning and evening. There's a Gemara in Brochas Yud Gimel. Kriya Shema de Rabbi Yehuda Nosi de Rebbe, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Shem Echad. And Rav asks Reb Chia, Rabbeinu HaKodesh didn't recite Kriya Shema. And he says, when he covered his eyes, Kishema v'yodei al einav, that is when he said Shema Yisrael. He did it very briefly, nobody noticed, but that's his Kriya Shema, Shema Yisrael. And then there's a machlokes in Gemara, Chayze v'koyre, Yena Chayze v'koyre. After he finished the Shiur, did he once again say all the Gimel Parshiyos or not? And there's a machlokes. And one man the Omer proves Yena Chayze v'koyre. And that is why he's makbid every day as part of the Shiur to teach a halacha that is associated with Yetzias Mitzrayim. Why? Because with Shema Yisrael, you're Yotze Kriya Shema, but you still have to be Makayim the mitzvah of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. How did Rabbi do that? Every day he mentioned the halacha about Yetzias Mitzrayim. Kosav HaMagon Avraham, and the Magen Avraham appears in two different sources. Samach Zayin Siv Koten Aleph, Kuvav Siv Koten Hey. Even though the Gemara says Suffolk Oma Emes Yatzav Suffolk Loyam Achoizer V'Koirei, that is only be a Mekedem. But since our minig is to say Shira Sayam every day in Pesukah de Zimra, we are already Yotzes Chiras Yetzias Mitzrayim with Shira Sayam, and therefore Einoi Choizer V'Koirei. Rebbe Kiva Eger on the spot quotes Chasni Hagon Agol Reb Moshe Sofer. It's beautiful that a Shver quotes his son-in-law, but not everybody has a son-in-law like the Sam Sofer. Rebbe Kiva Eger quotes the Sam Sofer, and the Sam Sofer speaks his own mind, not only on Shulchan Aruch, but also Tshuvas Arachaim Tes Vav Aleph. Tes Vav Aleph, because by some mistake, the printers printed two Siman Tes Vav Tshuvas Arachaim Sam Sofer. So they made Tes Vav Aleph, Tes Vav Beis, Tes Vav Aleph. Sam Sofer voices his argument on his own. Rabbi Kiva Egan and some Sofer say, you're not Yetzias Chiris Yetzias Mitzrayim only by mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim. Kriyas Yamsov is not Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's the greatest miracle, but it's not Yetzias Mitzrayim. And if Chazal say Tzorech Lahaski Yetzias Mitzrayim, whether it's based on the Mantis Kriyas Yetzias Mitzrayim, or it's based on the Posuk Zochar Yom Zeh Asher Yetzosam Mitzrayim, what we need to mention is Yetzias Mitzrayim and not Kriyas Yamsov, so you're not Yotze B'Shiras Hayam. Shulchan Aruch Harav has the same argument against the Magen Avraham. Samach Zayin Aleph. L'shitosoi Mem Vav Tet Siv Tet. Shulchan Aruch Harav says, if a person is late to davening or his minion is late and he's afraid they won't say Kriya Shema v'Berchaseh before Safsman Kriya Shema, what should he do? He should be mechaver when we say Shema Yisrael before Psukkah de Zimmer and Berchas Shachar. The minhag is to say Shema Yisrael. He should be Yotze Kriya Shema. And how is he Yotze Tzchis Yetzias Mitzrayim? When he says the pasuk Onochi Hashem Elokecha Hamalchu Me'eretz Mitzrayim. And why doesn't he say Shiras Hayam? L'shitoso you're not Yotze with Shiras Hayam. How would we understand the Magen Avraham? One could argue. In Sichas Minchas Osher, Sichas Chele Gimel, I don't recall which Ma'amar, it's based on Ma'amorim, but I brought great sources from Gedolah Adoros that the Ikar Yetzias Mitzrayim, the climax, was Kriyas Yamsuf. And it is only by Kriyas Yamsuf that Bnei Yisrael achieved the gewaltige Madrege, Chazal say in Mechilta, Rosu Shifcho Alayam Mashal Aroy Cheskel V'Kol HaNaviim. That was Kriyas Yamsuf. And the Pasuk says, Zekeli Vanveyu. And Chazal say, Hoyomaram Be'etzba V'Oimrim. They pointed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It was tangible in their eyes. And they said, Zekeli Vanveyu. Also in the most practical sense, it is only when Vayar B'nei Yisrael Sintzayim Meis Al Svas Hayam, when they saw the Egyptian armies totally destroyed and devastated, it is only then that they felt redeemed. It is only then that they felt free, and that was Shlemus HaGeula. So according to this approach, which is based on the Gra, Rabbeinu Bachya, Ibn Ezra, I brought gewaltige sources, and it's in the Kuntas that we printed this week. So that is the climax, the essence of Yetzias Mitzrayim. But I really think, according to the Chassam Sofer, when Chazal say Tzorach Hask Yetzias Mitzrayim, doesn't necessarily mean Yetzias Mitzrayim. It means the process, the miracles. Yodei Agdoila v'Zroi HaNotuyo. Because the source and the argument of the Magen Avraham is halacha. It's not mashma the Gemara to Rabbeinu HaKodesh every day said the same halacha. And which halacha was it? Tzorach Hask Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's mashma the Gemara every day he mentioned some halacha that's associated with Yetzias Mitzrayim. So maybe according to the Magen Avraham, you don't need to mention Dafka Hamalchu Me'eretz Mitzrayim, but rather something about Yetzias Mitzrayim. Whether it's based on Zochar Yom Zeh, or on Mantis Kriyas Yom Tzeitzchum Me'eretz Mitzrayim. So this is an interesting machlokes between the Magen Avraham on one hand and three of the great Achronim on the other hand, Shulchan Aruch Harav, Rabbi Kiva and some Sefer that disagree with the Magen Avraham. In two different sources do we find that learning halachas is as if we're makayim mitzvahs zechira. And that's fascinating. Regarding Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim, and I wrote about this at great length in Chele Gimel, Moyadim, and also when I go to Shal Pesach Minchas Osher. On one hand, we all remember the greatest Tanum were sitting, Koloi Serale B'mei Brak, Voiskim B'Yetzias Mitzrayim. But in the Tosefta, we find a similar story, Voiskim B'Ilchas HaPesach. What do we say to the Ben Chocham? Hilchas HaPesach, Ayin Maftir Elach HaPesach Afikoimon. I explained many times, we have hundreds upon hundreds of Agodas. And all these Agodas have Pshetlach and Pelpulim and Veretlach and Perperois. But that's not the mitzvah of Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Rambam clearly says, Perek Zayin Mehilchas Chometz HaMatzah, mitzvah says Shal Torah Saper Benisim V'Neflois. So what I explain is this. You're not Yotze the mitzvah unless you relate miracles. But when Chazal say Kol Amar B'Lesaper Areza Meshubach, that includes everything. It includes Hilchos Korban Pesach, Hilchos Matzah B'Morim, Pshetlach, Pilpulim. All these hundreds of Agodas are things that Gedolei Yisrael said B'Leil HaSeder. L'chayra, it's a bitul mitzvah to say. The only mitzvah L'Saper B'Nisim V'Flois. And what I argue is, you're only Yotzu with Nisim V'Flois. But anything associated with the Yetzias Mitzrayim is B'chal Kol Amar B'Lesaper. But what we find in Brochas Yud Gimel, and the approach of the Magen Avraham, is a far greater chiddush, that you're Yotze Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim with halachas. So I think the explanation is there's a difference between Zechira and Sipur. Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is clearly defined. Nisim v'neflois, nothing else. Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim is just a remembrance. And this mitzvah Yukib the Yukayim with anything associated with Yetzias Mitzrayim. Especially according to Rashi. Laman Tiskris Yetzias Mitzrayim alidei achilas Pesach v'matzah. Pesach and Matzah bring to mind stages in Yetzias Mitzrayim. Pesach brings to mind Makas B'chodesh. Posach Hashem ala Pesach. That's Makas B'chodesh. It's not Yetzias Mitzrayim. Matzah is even before they left Eretz Mitzrayim. Le'ispek b'tzekem shalav hiseinu lahachmitz. So there's reason to argue. And now I want to be Miyasav the Magen Avraham. Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim is lav davke etzem hayetzia, but the miracles of the process. And that is why you're Yotze, even with the halach. And the third source is even a greater chiddush, Ravid and Rash Mishantz, and their Pirushim, the Torah's Kohanim Sefro, Tchilas Parshas Bechukos, and they say, when you learn Hilchos Megillah, you're Makayim the mitzvah of Schiras Maseh Amalek. Why? Hilchos Megillah brings to mind Haman. Haman was Mezer Agag. Agag was Mezer Amalek. It almost sounds like Tchilas Doim Yam, Yam Doim Rakia, Rakia Doim Rakis Yaakov. So once again, I don't think you're Yotze the mitzvah of Schiras Maseh Amalek. What they mean to say is, just like we find Kol Amar B'Lesaper B'Maseh Amalek Areza Meshubach. You're not Yotze with Hilchos Megillah, but you're Mekayim the mitzvah of Schiras Maseh Amalek with Mikra Megillah. It's still a huge chiddush. And with Hilchos Megillah, which is even a bigger chiddush, because in Hilchos Megillah you don't even mention Haman. In Megillah Esther you mention Haman. So once again, regarding Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim and Schiras Maseh Amalek, you're not Yotze, that is a mitzvah. Regarding Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, my understanding of the Magen Avraham, you are even Yotze. And that is a gewaldige chiddush. So I mentioned before one approach that Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim is part of the mitzvah of Kriyas Shema. Another approach is Schira is part of Sipur. So let me explain. B'derech Musa, b'derech Avodah, and Pnimius, there are two reasons that we are supposed to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim. Two fundamentals. The Ramban at the end of Parshas Boy, and I quoted this Ramban hundreds of times, and Yehirotz and Alavai many more times. מן הניסים הגדולים והמפרסומים, עוד המועד בניסים הנסתורים, שהם יסוד כל התורה כולו, שאין לנו חלק בתורס מוישה עד שנדע, שכל דבורנו ומקרנו הם ניסים בהם טבע, במנהגו של העולם. And then the Ramban goes on to explain the importance of recognizing Chazdei Shemayim and thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu. אין לעליון חפץ בתחתונים כי אם שידע אדם ויודע לאלוקov שברואים. So on one hand, we are supposed to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim to be mechazik el emunah, and in Shiur v'Shelach, Halal v'Hoidoyah, to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Oid Hashem oid b'fir v'serch rabbi mahaleleno. The other principle is Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shemayim. So many times, Chodesh Nisan, when we prepare for the Seder, I mentioned there's only one pasuk that we quote 4 times בליל הסדר. בעבור זה עשו השם לי. And Rashi explains בעבור זה כדי שאקיים מצוותיו. It's a posuk. כי לי בני ישראל עבודיהם, אשר יצאיסי אויסם מארץ מצרים. So the tachlis of Yetzias Mitzrayim is twofold. And the tachlis of Schilas Yetzias Mitzrayim is twofold. Lohoidus ulahalel, lekabel ol malchus shemayim. And these two fundamental ideas in Pnimius and Musar substantiate the two different drocha, Meiser and Lamdis. If it's about Kabbalah ol malchus shemayim, it's part of Kriya Shema. If it's about Lohoidus ulahalel, it's part of Sipu Yetzias Mitzrayim. So it's interesting. Part of the Haggadah, an integral part of the Haggadah is Halal. And on the other hand, Schias Mitzrayim is part of Kriya Shema. So many times I explain my feeling. Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim is more about Halal. Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim is more about Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shemayim. And that is an idea I wrote about at great length in Sichas Minchas Osher Chelek Gimel. One additional thought, very brief, a moshel. And this is a modern day moshel. Don't look for it by the Magid Medubina because he can't say this moshel. It's a modern moshel. So anytime you buy a new telephone or a new cell phone, there's a feature, there's a possibility of putting all your memories, all your numbers into the phone. It's nerve-wracking. It's a process. You need to take a deep breath and set aside 20 minutes and read that most boring of all literature in the world. User's Manual. There's no other way. Take out that booklet. You're going to need to punch 100 keys, 100 numbers. But in the long run, it's a time saver. So as long as you have this phone and you want to call someone, you just need to press one key. And all the 10 numbers will come up on the screen. So my feeling is, Beleil HaSeder, that is when you put everything into your memory. That is when we all put everything into our collective memory of Klal Yisrael. Take a deep breath. Set aside time. It's going to take all night. But if you do it properly, all year round, there will be no need to tell long stories. All year round, you just press one button, and everything will come up. All your emotions, all your feelings, all your lahoidis v'lahalal, and all your kabbalah sol malchus shemayim, and that is schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim in every day. So Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim is the fundamental. That's the real avodah. But if you do it properly, and you put anything into your memory all year round, you just need to press one button. And you should have all the feelings come up, and all the lahoides ulahalal, and all the avodaim asher tzeisi yoisam me'eretz Mitzrayim. So when we read the parashiyos of Golos veGeula, it is a proper time to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to hope and pray. Kodesh Baruch Yishlach lanu Mashiach tzedkeinu v'yig'olenu b'meheru v'yameinu. We should be zoiche b'korav to be as Goel Tzedek b'meheru v'yameinu. Amen.